session just a few minutes early because of the violence colloquium that we're also hosting, which is happening at the Wits Club, and everyone who's here is more than welcome to come through to the violence colloquium. If you'd like any more information about that, it is the last day of the colloquium. You can ask Gugu outside. So that's at Wits Club, starting at 9. So we'll try and end a few minutes early so that people can get there without losing too much time at the colloquium. Then I have to introduce Naadira. Naadira Munshi is our speaker for today. She's a good friend and comrade of mine, so it's an honor to introduce her today to all of you. But I'll give you the official bio, the one that I don't know even after being her friend for many years. So Naadira Munshi is a project coordinator at the Southern Africa office of the Public Services International, a global trade union federation for public sector workers. She worked as a researcher on Seri's legal team at the Marikana Commission of Inquiry, representing the families of mine workers killed at Marikana in August 2012. As well as the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, her MA dissertation was on the rise of AMCU and the Platinum Belt. Naadira, it's over to you.
No, there's a mic there. There's a mic.
So thank you everyone for coming today. SWOP seminars have always been one of my favorite seminar series at Wits. So to come back and do a seminar, especially when SWOP is headed by the incredible Prashani Naidu, is really an honor, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I also want to thank you for accommodating my change in schedule. So last week we commemorated 7 years of the Marikana massacre on August 16. We remember the 44 men who lost their lives in that week, and the 37 mine workers who lost their lives at the hands of police in a labor struggle fighting for a living wage. My master's thesis was on the rise of AMCU, the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union on the Platinum Belt between 2012 and 2014. And today I'm going to focus on one chapter, and that was the 2014 strike. The 2014 strike was historic. It was the longest and largest post-apartheid strike, and it was the longest and largest strike that year in the world. It lasted 5 months, and it brought the Platinum Belt to its knees. Here I want to focus on the politics of this strike, how it consolidated support for AMCU on the Platinum Belt. And I'm choosing to focus on the 2014 strike because I think 2012 is a much better known story and more written about. So my entry to AMCU, as Christine said, was that I worked as a legal researcher at the Socioeconomic Rights Institute and was on the legal team representing AMCU and the families at the Marikana Commission of Inquiry. My research was based on interviews with AMCU leadership at national and branch level, as well as a collection of available media, press statements, etc. that came out during that period. I want to begin by giving some... Oh, it's gone. Okay, so I want to begin by giving some context to AMCU. AMCU was registered in 2001. It was formed after a dispute between Joseph Matunjwa and his mine management at the time at Van Dyke Douglas Colliery Mine in Witbank. He was an NUM shop steward. He was dismissed, and in response 3,000 mine workers went on strike. The mine was forced to reinstate him, but when they did, NUM brought charges against him for bringing the union into disrepute. There was a dispute with the union process, and as a result, his membership from NUM was terminated. Angered, the 3,000 mine workers mandated him to find a new union, and that led to the birth of AMCU. For its first few years, AMCU organized mainly smaller mining and construction companies in KZN and Mpumalanga. Their break into the Northwest Province began really slowly. They started attempting around 2005, but in 2008 they made headway. They were recruiting mainly in the Brits area, and then they got into Simanko chrome mines, and finally into London shaft sinkers. And shaft sinkers are not permanent workers. A story I don't have time to tell is that by 2011, AMCU had a big break and they got into the Karee mine at Lonmin. This was a big moment because to organize at Lonmin meant that they were organizing one of the 3 main platinum producing mines. Lonmin, Impala, Platinum and Anglo Platinum. It was also important because they started to organize general workers, brothel operators, etc., and became a minority union. Oh, yes, sorry. So this was a big moment for AMCU. So when the 2012 Platinum strike wave hit the Platinum Belt, it began at Impala before spreading to Lonmin and then onto Anglo Mines. And when it started in Impala, word of mouth had already spread that there was a new union organizing platinum workers. So the AMCU's leadership was able to, during the Impala strike, meet with the strike leaders and eventually began to recruit. A similar story happened in Lonmin and Anglo. I'm not going to go into the 2012 story, but the point for today is that by mid-2013, AMCU was the biggest union and had won the battles for its recognition against NUM, and this meant that it was the largest union with bargaining rights to lead the 2013 Platinum Belt negotiations. And that brings us to the 2014 strike. But in order to understand the complexity of the strike, we really need to understand the meaning of the Marikana massacre. Because this was a thread that ran and sustained the strike and gave rise to the heightened political tension and the national investment in the strike. So Marikana was devastating for mine workers. I'm going to talk of a lack of accountability, a sense of betrayal, and sustained pain. The 2012 strike wave that rocked the platinum industry was a result of mine workers recognizing that their struggle for living wages were best fought outside the established trade union, in particular NUM, which had failed to secure a living wage for them. They regarded NUM as compromised, too close to mine management, ethnically divided, and ineffective. The rejection of established labor organizations was not new on the Platinum Belt, and it created an opening for a new union to enter the fold. Instead of doing an honest reflection, though, NUM chose an easy way out, and they decided to blame AMCU. They called AMCU vigilante, violent, and unreasonable. This was the same language used by the mining companies. And this is despite the fact that at any point on strike, majority of the workers were NUM members. This gets forgotten and often is lost, but it explains the sense of pain that workers felt. For many mine workers, NUM was their union of choice, and it was a primary union organizing black mine workers. NUM was a member of COSATU, which was part of the Tripartite Alliance, along with the ANC and the SWOP. For the state, governed by the ruling party with the support of mine workers to send its police to kill them, it created a lot of initial confusion and ultimately led to feelings of betrayal. And this was because the response from the alliance was to abandon workers. They abandoned workers, they abandoned the community of Marikana and the families back home in the Eastern Cape, Northwest, Swaziland, and Lesotho. Besides initial support from the local Department of Social Development, government took no responsibility, leaving everyone to fend for themselves. The men killed at Marikana were family, friends, colleagues, and comrades of fellow mine workers. Their death was felt across the platinum sector, as mine workers were all engaged in the same struggle for a living wage. When I did my interviews in 2014, that pain of Marikana was still tangible, and many found it difficult to talk about the pain and what it represented. Politically, in 2013, COSATU was a federation in crisis. NUMSA had taken a decision not to support the ANC in the upcoming 2014 elections. NUM had suffered a major blow to its membership on the Platinum Belt and to its reputation. Government attention was focused on the impact of another strike looming on the platinum sector and less on the legitimacy of workers' demands for a living wage. AMCU had its own challenges. Despite winning workers and a growth in membership, it was still viewed as a violent union and a black union that was not known. They had to find a way to change this narrative and defend their legitimacy. So in 2014, we come to the strike, and in an effort to understand the negotiations, I identified what I'm coining today 7 phases of negotiation. And these phases, I'm going to speak to it very briefly. I want to go briefly through this because the interesting part is really the parallel events and politics happening alongside the strike. So the first period was from June 2013 to mid-January 2014, and this was when AMCU put forward their demand for 12,500 basic pay in 1 year, and the companies were offering between 7.5 and 9%. This would take 10 years to reach 12,500. They deadlocked, and AMCU successfully applied for a strike certificate, and the strike started on the 23rd of January. Almost immediately, the CCMA intervened and offered to mediate. AMCU, through a series of negotiations, reduced their demand from 12,500 basic pay to 12,500 as a full package over 4 years. The company still rejected this, and on the 5th of March, it deadlocked. So AMCU held a series of 3 marches to the union buildings and to each of the 3 companies. The fourth period was, we now enter mid-April, and that's 3 months into the strike, panic hits. And the Minister of Labour, Mildred Oliphant, again intervenes. This time, the companies offer 12,500 in 5 years. But AMCU says, no, we've already compromised. So the companies take their offer directly to workers, and as a result, 2 workers were killed following an SMS by Lonman and complying with their date to return to work. AMCU takes Lonman to court, and the judge surprises everyone by offering to mediate. 3 days of private mediation failed, and almost immediately afterwards, in the 6th kind of phase of negotiations, the new Department of Minerals and Energy, Minerals Minister Ramatlodi intervenes. He really does make progress, but an ANC Lahotla happens and suspends his task team because they warn him about getting involved in strikes that are politically motivated. So about 2 weeks later, the task team meets without him, and it takes them about 2 weeks, and eventually they reach an agreement. They sign for, AMCU signs the package for 12,500 over 4 years, a full package across the company. So these 7 phases lasting 5 months really tell a strange story of no compromise, and a real need for mediation. But so it has to be read in context of what was the parallel events taking place and happening alongside these negotiations. So the first thing to really note is that the demand for 12,500 came directly from the Twin Pearl strike, as did the demand for negotiations to be negotiated in rands and not in percentages. Workers felt that percentages were confusing, the company was hiding a lot, and so they wanted to understand what they were negotiating. The second was that this was the first time that the platinum belt was rocked by a simultaneous strike. There's no collective bargaining on the platinum belt. And usually strikes happen at individual companies, and this time the entire industry was brought to a standstill, and this caused a lot of alarm for business. I want to talk about, I'm not going to go through the points on the table, but rather speak to it, and I want to talk about the marches that AMCU held to the presidency and the union buildings and what they said, because I think it tells us of the politics of AMCU. The key message to the presidency was a complaint of abuse of state power by unfair treatment and interference by government departments and officials in collusion with companies. Bladen Zumande called AMCU a vigilante union. Susan Shabangu says the growth of AMCU was an attack on the ANC. She was alleged to have supported AMPLAT in their attempt to sue AMCU for 591 million in damages to property, increased security costs, production losses. AMPLAT also wanted Matunjwa arrested for contempt for breaking picketing rules. The ANC told President Zuma that NUM was no longer vocal, too close to the ANC, and trapped in an unhelpful alliance. He complained of the continuing exploitation where mine workers continue to earn low wages, live in poverty, and with low levels of education, while foreign-owned mining companies made exorbitant profits in collusion with the state. In the memorandum to mining companies, AMCU appealed to the companies to consider the historical legacy of colonialism and apartheid when determining wages. They said mining remains underpinned by cheap black labor, slave wages, hazardous living and working conditions. They accused the companies of capital flight and price collusion, poor transformation, non-compliance with the social labor plan. AMCU called for an end to the apartheid partisan job grading system, which led to CEOs of Implat, Lonman and Amplat earning salaries that were 109, 209, and 326 times higher than that of an entry-level worker. They said the direct communication to mine workers was divisive, it increased tensions, and it undermined the right to strike. And finally, they urged companies to adopt the ILO standard of decent work. In the table, you'll see that Contralesa, the Organization for Traditional Authorities, urged workers to encourage to go to work. A new union, WOW, was formed during the strike, and they also encouraged workers to go to work and not to strike. So all of this, you can really see, highlights the political and economic significance of the strike, and it explains the pressure and power struggle for legitimacy of the state, the alliance, and business on one side, and the mine workers and AMCU on the other. So how did AMCU deal with all of this? I want to begin by first looking at the negotiating team. The negotiating team was led by AMCU's treasurer, Jimmy Gama. A new union meant new shop stewards who were not trained, and therefore new negotiators who lacked experience, and therefore AMCU had to invest in training. They workshopped their shop stewards on the negotiating process, what to expect, and negotiating strategies. Shop stewards and the leadership debated about whether to go on strike simultaneously, and many had to be convinced about going on strike and putting pressure on the industry as a whole. Their inexperience put a lot of pressure on the national office, and the length of the strike was unexpected and proved to be very costly. AMCU was fortunate, though. They received assistance from the Alternative Information and Development Center, the AIDC, to assist them in the negotiation process. But the AIDC also did research to show and support that the companies can afford the wage demand that AMCU was making. This was later supported by independent research launched here at WITS. The negotiations for shop stewards themselves was difficult, but it was also exciting. It was a space of learning, a space of immense responsibility. The negotiating teams met regularly, and this allowed them to form and build relationships with one another, to network, and to create a profile within the union. So while the negotiations were taking place, AMCU had to control the strike on the ground. They had been bruised by the 2012 strike in terms of public reputation. And so here I want to show how they organized themselves. They closed ranks, and amidst the pressure and need for control, they kind of isolated themselves. AMCU shop stewards and branch officials who were not part of the AMCU shop stewards and branch officials who were not part of the negotiating team were responsible for the organizing workers and sustaining the strike on the ground. They would hold regular meetings. As the strike progressed, there were times no change in negotiations, but these meetings would still happen even if it was just for prayer and song. And the size of these meetings decreased as the strike progressed, as many workers returned home to wait out the strike. Where possible, national office bearers would try to attend mass meetings. And this was important because platinum workers complained of an absent NUM leadership. AMCU would report on every wage offer, but they also had a strike that was not time-bound, it did not expire. This surprised many workers. It gave a sense, their presence gave a sense of inclusion to workers who felt part of the conversation and in control of the decision-making of the strike. But there was an important factor for AMCU to these meetings. They had to counter the narrative of violence. So every meeting presented an opportunity for the national leadership and branch leaders to stress and repeat calls for non-violence, unity, and peace. The authority of the branch leadership was assisted by the fact that the leadership of the 5 Madota from the 2012 strike was incorporated into the union. And so AMCU's leadership held legitimacy among workers. They quickly centralized communication. Another lesson from 2012 was that they needed one message and one spokesperson. So this became Joseph Matunjwa, the president of the union. But they also felt pressure from mainstream media, who often reported on the strike from the viewpoint of a struggling economy and not from the right of workers to be paid a living wage. This growing pressure was something that workers experienced in 2012. So, in addition to AMCU encouraging workers not to speak to the media, workers themselves were very suspicious of outsiders and looked at outsiders with a level of wariness. Unfortunately, this included many activists who played a supporting role in the strike and sustained the momentum of the strike. Finally, the memory of Marikana was a major motivating factor. The loss of life suffered could not be in vain, and it was a pain that necessitated and justified the sacrifice workers made. It was well understood that this struggle was for a future generation. The level of sacrifice, the 5-month strike required a lot of sacrifice from workers, and 5 months without pay was really hard. It displayed AMCU's inexperience and lack of preparedness for the strike. There was no strike fund, so after 2 months, any savings by workers were generally depleted. Hunger, lack of food and basic necessities, lack of school fees and transport, lack of money to pay off existing debt simply led to new and mounting debt. Many workers, as I said, returned home to wait out the strike, but back home, they had to sell their livestock to sustain themselves. And so even when they returned, they returned overall poorer. In demonstrating the disruptive power of labor, we have to be honest about the cost of struggle and sacrifice that workers made. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the role of women, not just women mine workers, but community members. And this is probably best displayed by Sikala Sonke, who was a women's group founded after the massacre and who continue today to stand in support of mine workers, but also in their community. And they really organized and took responsibility within their community. And dealt with a lot of the trauma of the massacre. So overall, the strike was a symbolic victory for mine workers. They felt that they had honored the lives of the men who lost their lives in 2012. They regained a sense of strength in relation to the mining companies, and they were proud members of AMCU. The call for 12,500 for a living wage became a rallying call for workers across the country. The 2014 strike consolidated support for AMCU, and in that sense it was a victory for the union. They might not have gotten the wage demand that they want, but AMCU grew rapidly beyond the platinum belt. They started to organize in the gold and diamond sectors. Joseph Matunjwa emerged from the strike as a national hero and a powerful figure in the country's politics. AMCU went on to establish itself as an independent trade union that had to be taken seriously, and not just a violent vigilante union that was parading as a union. And in that sense, I want to conclude by saying that the 2014 strike was extraordinary. It was extraordinary because its context was that of the first post-apartheid state massacre. It was extraordinary because it brought the platinum industry to its knees. It was extraordinary because it was the longest post-apartheid strike, which lasted 5 difficult months. And finally, it was extraordinary because of the high level of contestation over the right of workers to strike, what constitutes living wages, and the legitimacy of working class expressions of power. Thank you.
Thanks, Naadira.
Yes, I'm done.
So we...
It's done.
No, it's not.
Can I test it?
Thanks, Maggie. So we have a good 30 minutes for discussion. So I'll take, I think we'll get in definitely 2 rounds, and we'll see if we can get 3. So I'll start with a few hands. I'll take 3 or 4. See, 1, 2, 3 back there. Okay, cool.
Morning, Chair. Morning, everybody. I'm Kuzwa Chetro. I'm an independent writer and political commentator. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. We saw on Tuesday the commission on the arms deal being set aside, and I was wondering if the Falam Commission on Marikana, can you also see the same scenario? Because according to me, it was just another whitewash, waste of taxpayers' money. And I was wondering if you did find out how much that Falam Commission cost. Because apparently, Judge Ian Falam is on record saying that the recommendation of his of that commission were not implemented, and that's why there are no prosecutions 7 years later, and still no compensation for the families of the deceased. Thank you.
The Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality usually applied in countries, but it could equally be applied in companies. And the huge difference, that figure you gave, didn't quite catch it, that the ratio of the earnings of the top people in the company to the lowest paid workers, that would have reflected the Gini coefficient in the inequality. And to prevent future problems, the unrest and the labour unrest, it will be necessary not only to increase the wages of the labour, but also to reduce that gap. So I'd just like your comments on that.
Thanks, Naadira. David Dickinson with Sociology. Two things. The first is, you didn't say about your research methodology and how you've come to present this interesting information. So if you could say something about that, that would be great. But the second thing I'd like to ask you really is perhaps the tension between a centralised union structure and the decentralised worker committees. And Luke Singwell, who I don't think is here, but he might be here, has written about this and the tension there. And you hint towards that, I think. But if you could say more about that, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, you can go.
So thank you for those questions. I mean, the Marikana Commission inquiry, it lasted 4 long years, and the report really, it gave a lot of information, but its recommendations and findings were really disappointing. We had this long commission, 3 years I think actually, we had this long commission that really recommended further investigation, and it held no political heads to account. So Judge Holland's right when he says that his recommendations haven't been implemented. There was a task team set up to look into public order policing, but I think what that task team eventually did, but versus what he recommended that it do, was very different. And so we still need to see justice. We still need to see justice in the forms of support to the mine workers and to the families. We need to see responsibility from the state for the actions of the police. We need to see responsibility from Lonman. At the time in 2012, Lonman claimed that they were going to build 5,000 houses. They built 3 show houses, and I don't think that has really changed. And we need to see responsibility politically, you know. The families, some compensation was paid out, but I think that Nomzamo Zondo from Seri is here, so she can speak a lot more to it. They really have to do, so the families, I think part of their compensation has been paid, but they're still fighting for the rest. That hasn't come out. I know that all the mine workers are still fighting. Some money has been paid, but especially those who were severely injured, those claims are still ongoing because they're really high. There's one mine worker who was shot 9 times. His claim has not been paid out, and he still continues to require medical assistance. So the Farthing Commission, it's a difficult one because one, you can say it was a complete whitewash, but I do think the value for me from that process was really the sheer amount of information and the expose of how the levels and depth that the police went into to cover up what happened and the extent to which they lied was exposed. And I don't really think that that story is well understood and well known. of the police cover-up. So inequality, yes. I mean, I think it's really just outrageous, really, the kinds of wage disparity between workers. I want to talk a little bit about a quote. Okay, I don't have it here, but a quote that one of the workers, the Amplat CEO, during the strike, I think towards the end of the strike, they got bonuses. We were claiming that they couldn't afford the wage demand, but then they got a ridiculous bonus share scheme for the shareholders. And he went on to say that he deserves this wage because he has to deal with the crap of strikes. He's at work and he's doing his work. He's not on strike. So that's the kind of just attitude of the top officials and management of these mines. So I do think that the state has some responsibility in playing a role to even out wages, but also the companies, it's not just about wages, like you said, it's also about proper development and investment in mining communities to deal with a whole host of things. First, it's the living conditions of mine workers, but also the impact on the environment that mining has. The research methodology. So, David, what I did was, a lot of it was ethnography based, so I was a researcher at the Marikana Commission. That's how I met AMCU. And I was very fortunate because I was in a position to build a relationship with them and attend a lot of their mass meetings, interact with them, and that really formed a lot of the basis of my findings, my interaction with AMCU, both the leadership and membership. I chose not to interview NUM at the time. The tensions were really high, and NUM was well researched about. I think they had heard a lot of statements. But I really wanted to begin to tell the story of AMCU as a new union and an emerging union. So I focused my energy on interviewing the leadership, branch officials, and membership, and spending as much time as I could in the field. Also, this particular chapter was a collection of almost every newspaper article I could get to piece together the different phases of negotiations and trawling through Lonman's press statements, AMCU's press statements, and NUM, etc. And so that was the result of the research. And then on the question of the centralized, decentralized leadership, I think it's an interesting topic. Luke did a lot of good and in-depth research looking at the worker committees of the 2012 strike wave. I think I was a little bit more sympathetic than he was, but what AMCU really did as they began to organize, because they grew really rapidly. And so they never had time. I mean, the 2014 strike, there was no regional leadership. There was no Congress that had a chance to take place before they had to go into the wage negotiations. So the 2012 leadership kind of just became incorporated into AMCU as the shop stewards. And so those same men, because they were all men, it was a few women, and that is a problem in the union. They went onto the the regional elections, which took place in, I think, October and December of 2014 after the strike. So there was a lot of tension between who has power within the union. Does it lie with the national office, or does it lie with its membership and with its leadership? During the strike, I will say that workers really felt a sense of power. So, for example, I remember one day saying to the mine workers, AMCU rejected the offer. And he quickly corrected me and he said, no, we did. We, the workers, rejected their offer. And that was the kind of constant reminder of a sense of ownership. But I do think that has changed. And as the union became more formalized, power became a lot more centralized. There were battles. The regional congress, there were battles. Matinda's faction lost in the Platinum Belt, and that was because Lonman and Amplat mines really were able to kind of group together and form a voting bloc. So it was clear, I mean, it's clear when people make speeches where their allegiances are, but it really also depended on workers rallying behind him, and that's what happened. It is true to say that also a lot of the leadership was persecuted and kind of shut out of the mine, especially at Anglo. And many of you will know the story of Comrade Makanya. And so those are tensions, I think, where, for me, really, what I often see is that Mutundra likes control, but he also likes to know what's happening, and so he does interfere with the union. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll stop there. I think I've answered you. Yeah.
Okay. Kelly, 2 and 3.
You didn't actually say what the settlement was at the end of the strike. And, you know, some people claimed it as a victory, and I just wonder how the union saw it, if they saw it as a victory, and if workers saw it as a victory. I also wanted to ask you, UMCO always claimed that they represented brokered workers in the way that NUM didn't. Was that true in the strike? Were contracted workers a large part of the strike and a militant element in the strike? And yeah, just a final query, you say talk about the AIDC research. And of course there was that very significant research in 2012 where it found out that a lot of money at Lonmin had been transferred to Bermuda, to the tax haven of Bermuda. And that in fact, if you analyze that, you took into account those profits, they would have been able to pay the 12,500 being demanded. And I just wondered what that information, what kind of role it played in the negotiations in 2014.
Hi, Langley Simpson from the Department of Science and Technology. The previous question hinted at some of the things that I want to actually deal with. The most remarkable thing about the strike is not that it went on so long. The most remarkable thing is that the price of platinum did not change. That is one of the key issues around it, because it connects to a lot of issues around the nature of the state and what the state in fact set up after 1994. This relates to various issues around land policy, the relationship between traditional land and the current land systems at the moment. So you talk, for example, workers going home, that implies there's still a migrant labor system. The nature of that migrant labor and how in fact families have to be catered for both at the mine as well as in traditional areas. This then leads to various issues of debt. Where does that debt come from? What are the nature of micro-lenders? How does that connect to the actual system as allowed by national treasury and government economic policy? The issue of the illicit financial flows by the companies, how they actually set that up. The fact, what is also the distinction between platinum price and the share price of the companies? In fact, the relationship between that, given how they were changing and what is the time. In other words, I'm looking for a broader political economy context for the nature of the emergence of AMCU and the different forms of organization. If you can comment on some of those issues. Thanks.
Thanks. Who is the third?
Morning, my name is Trina Mashachan. I'm from Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. There is a long history about inequality in this country between workers and employers. And it's a consistent gap that there is no way of closing it. The concentration should not always be on the mines alone. In the public sector, there are challenges everywhere in this country. And as a developing country, we need to find ways of closing that particular gap. And sitting here consistently reminding ourselves of what happened in the past, it's good to acknowledge and condemn what happened. But there must always be a solution taking the country forward. Thank you.
Over to you.
Okay. So Kelly, yes, I went to the rally that decided to end the strike, and really the atmosphere there was joyful. It was electric. Workers were proud. The union was proud. They presented this as a victory, and I think symbolically it was a victory. I do think that there was a lot of compromise though. So when you come to the negotiations. What it meant was that mine workers would receive an annual increase of 1,000 rand to their basic pay. RDOs would, so there were kind of negotiations for RDOs and surface workers, rockfall operators. And so underground workers would receive about 1,000 rand, taking them to approximately a basic wage of 5,000. Sorry, from 5,000 to 9,000 in 2016 of a basic wage. The cost to company, I think, would be 12,500. Surface workers received a little bit less. They would get not 9,000 by 2016, but 8,000 by 2016. And one of the things that led to this victory was that workers felt it was significantly above inflation. So in that sense, also it was a victory. I do think a lot of the sense of victory also came from the fact that this was a struggle from 2012 and that workers fought and they got a lot more than what they had. And many workers would say that they can now put their children through school, but also in a sense the strike kind of brought workers together. Shop stewards during the strike were told, yeah, you're the one forcing people to starve. But after the strike, they were told, oh, you're the ones who got more money into our pocket. You know, so in that sense, I think people felt proud of what they had achieved. I'm not saying it was an outright victory. I think it was a difficult victory, and it was a compromise victory. But I do think it was. Uncle said that they did organize a lot of brokered workers. I think they found. I think that a lot of the brokered workers that they organized were not in platinum belts. It was far more in the small mining companies that they organized in KZN and in Mpumalanga. I think in mining it was they faced the same challenges as NUM, and I haven't really followed up with the union post 2014 to see whether once they entered the platinum belt as a majority union, if they then began to recruit brokered mine workers in platinum. They used to organize in KZN and Mpumalanga really small construction companies, etc. And so that's where a lot of that membership was. The tax work on AIDC, I think somewhat links to the last question as well. It played an important role. I think after that research came out, and then the research by WITS supporting it, I think for the first time the media really began to report on issues of inequality and of tax evasion and the gross kind of conduct of mining companies, both in terms of tax evasion but also the attitude towards workers and mining communities. I do think AIDC's support for UMCA played a vital role in this victory. I know that AIDC would often sit with them, with the negotiators, turning out the numbers, you know, trying to sort of what they would compromise on and what they wouldn't. But that piece of research, I think, remains relevant not just to platinum. I think that piece of research really speaks to broader issues of our economy. I want to agree with you that we do need a broader political analysis. It's not what I've done today, but really part of what you're saying really comes out because in 2012, if I'm correct, there was also the issue of Ubank. It was one of the main banks lending mine workers money, and they came, I think they were liquidated or something, but they really were showed up for borrowing money to mine workers at exorbitant interest rates. The real sad thing is that NUM sat on the board of Ubank. And so I think that part of the political economy is also the relationships and problematizing the alliance and whether the alliance really serves workers today or not. And I mean, Linking to the last question, I think the comrade's right. We have to address challenges of inequality, and part of that beginning to do so is addressing illicit financial flows, addressing corporate tax and how much we tax corporates, and not increasing VAT, charging the poorer people more and more tax, but corporates less tax. So thank you.
Are there any other questions? We do have a little bit of time if there's anyone else who wants to ask something. No one else? Oh, we've got one here, and then Noor and I've got a question, so maybe I'll ask mine first. My question is really around something that's been talked about in terms of changes in politics, unions, and what the shifts are, whether that's post-Marikana or starting at the point of Marikana. And I really wanted to just ask you, in terms of AMCU, do you see any innovation in the way they organize unions, or do you think they've fallen back into the same institutionalization that has plagued the NUM and many of the other COSATU unions?
Actually, you've stolen my thunder. But I do want to make a point, and please comment on it, and that's the point you've made about the internal life of AMCU as a result of the strike. And I think there's a more general point to be drawn from that, because those of you who suffer the business day because it's the only way of getting half-decent news will know that regularly in the pages of Business Day, whenever there's a strike, there's some bright bugger with a matric in maths, who goes through and says, these workers have been on strike for 6 weeks, this is what they've lost, they've settled for this, so in fact what they've lost overall is this, proving that strikes are really not worth it. And what these commentators, partly because they've never been in a collective organisation other than probably their church or something, I'm not sure that's a collective organisation, but anyway, is that they miss that point entirely. And the point is that the level of class consciousness and power, even if it's not termed in that way, is really astonishing. And that's what surprises all of us in the trade union movement in the sort of mix of a strike. But I just want to take, that clearly in AMCU's case, that was astonishing, the level of class consciousness it was gathering, the thirst for education, innovation in organising, reaching out, making sure that there was democratic participation, all of those things, which are really priceless for a union's experience. They're absolutely priceless. So you can't put a cost on those sort of things. And of course, the most important thing is that you're prepared to fight again. That's what people miss. You're prepared to fight again because you've won, and you're prepared to make those sacrifices again. But I just want to one further little point on this about the importance of that is that because support for the strike from the rest of the trade union movement was limited, to say the least, and frankly shameful, in the sense that other mine workers unions weren't brought out, weren't supporting the strike. Other workers were barely called upon. And we know why, comrades. Because there was a sectarian politics at work, where people were putting the aims of their own organisation before that of the broader class question. And what that's meant, in effect, is that it seems to me that even though the outcome of the strike was extraordinarily good, it seems to me, given the circumstances, and the amount of experience in the union, is that victory wasn't owned by the class. It wasn't owned by other workers. So as a consequence, despite internally, inside AMCU, you had a rise of class consciousness that didn't seep over into the rest of the class. And you can see that in, people were inspired by the outcome, but prepared to struggle, less so. And I think that that's got to be a key lesson from this strike. And in fact, if we're serious about a class response to the sorts of challenges that we're facing now, we've got to learn the lessons from that experience. So I'd like you to comment on that. A shocking way of getting 5 minutes. Complete plunder, sorry.
Clearly didn't steal your thunder.
Take a bit more than that.
Yeah, but it did steal my thunder, so I'm going to have to change my question. The question is really about the character of the union now and the extent to which that really important and critical strike of 2014 and the kind of very important insights that you've given, which I think provides a necessary counter-narrative to what the dominant media conveyed. So I think it's really, really important. But I'd like you to say something more about the character of the union, and I think you know what question is coming, and that is Joseph Matunjwa. And it is true that during the strike, both 2012 and 2014, as typically happens when workers are in such an intense struggle, there is in fact a lot of workers' democracy. Workers attend meetings, etc., right? The organization opens up. But you did hint in one of your responses about the politics of factionalism. So I wonder if you could say something about the character of the union post-2014, the extent to which AMCU now is very similar to NUM and perhaps other trade unions, or whether that struggle of 2014 represented a different kind of model of unionism in the contemporary period that other unions in SAF2 and elsewhere might learn from. And of course, it does seem that notwithstanding the mass participation of workers and workers' democracy, that Matunjwa looms large, that his personality looms large, that he does see himself as a bit of a messiah in the way that Juju sees himself as a messiah. And of course, both are fundamentally wrong. But it does seem to me that there are these messianic characters that have emerged in the post-2012 period that we have to contend with in our politics.
So, thank you. I do think that part of the innovation of AMCU in 2014 was really that it did back to basics and basic trade unionism. It would go to workers, report to workers, be present, and immediately after 2014, when I was doing some of my interviews, it would attend to workplace struggles. So, for example, if workers felt unsafe working in a particular area, they reported to AMCU, and AMCU would take that seriously. And so, just that back to basics trade unionism was one of the biggest kind of moments of kind of, I think, appreciation from workers, you know. But I do think that there is something to say about independent trade unionism in today's context, and a space for more independent unionism that can really challenge a state that talks left but really is not. We do have a state that's invested in a neoliberal capitalist economy, and we have to take that seriously as Labour. Yeah, I think to come to, I want to disagree with you slightly, Steve. I think that yes, there wasn't as much kind of more strikes and more action that we hoped to see from 2012, but I do think, and 2014, but I do think that there was some sense, at least within AMCU. I mean, AMCU grew to gold and platinum, etc. It began to organize, and recently they led a bit of a disastrous, another 5-month strike in the gold sector that was disastrous. But this links to some of the other questions around AMCU's way of organizing. And in 2012, there were a lot of activists, a lot of people supporting the strike, trying to demonstrate and show active solidarity. But the response from AMCU was to kind of push back, even when there were people helping. And to this, and that they've never stopped really. And so the recent strike in the gold sector, part of its disaster was that it was only being reported out in the business days. You know, there was no other kind of left media and rallying around to really support the strike, and there was no space to do that from its leadership. So I do think that was, in some sense, really devastating because of the cost that workers make when they go on strike. And so to lose so badly was a loss following such an amazing victory, you know. But also I do think that 12,500 became a rally call. Among workers, we saw people talk. There was a sense of talk about inequality, but I do think some of that eventually becomes a bit undermined by by the style of leadership and what Noor is talking about, because then it becomes also focused on I'm a leader and I can present this for you, rather than you actually workers who fought and struggled and were the ones who both went on strike and suffered the losses of the strike, or the cost of the strike. I think Matunda's a difficult figure. I have a lot of respect for him, but I do disagree with his political leadership. Part of the problem also is the ownership of Marikana and the memory of Marikana. And that has presented real challenges because Sikhala Sonke, for example, the women's group, who are women from the community, who really went into the community and trained themselves as social workers to deal with the trauma of 2012 within their community. They wanted to hold a prayer session at the Kopi, and Amku didn't allow them to. The Kopi is walking distance from people's homes, you know, and that's the sense of kind of, oh, we own the Kopi, we own Marikana, we own its memory, and you will only interact with it, and we allow you to. You haven't asked permission. So there I do fundamentally disagree. And I do think that Matundra, I mean, I have a lot of respect for him, but I do think his leadership style needs to be more open. There were recent, I think publicly known factions within AMCU with its deputy president, who kind of eventually left the union, who was kicked out of the union. I mean, I think the one unfair criticism was always that came out in the 2014 strike was that AMCU hadn't been to Congress. They hadn't been to Congress. But they hadn't needed a Congress in 2014, you know. They were still within their time, and so now is when they have to have a Congress. I know that they recently said that their last gold strike was the reason they haven't had it. So we'll wait to see if they do have one in September. But with the factions being kicked out of the union, it's likely that Mutundra will emerge again as a leader. But I have to be honest and say I'm not sure of the recent internal dynamics within the union. I hope I've answered questions. But really I just want to say thank you. There's a lot of safe and familiar faces in the audience, and I appreciate you here today.
Thanks, Naadira. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just want to say a few other thank yous, obviously to Gugu and Brittany, always for organizing these sessions for us, and FES, who funds the SWOP Breakfasts. The Violence Colloquium, as I said again, happening at Wits Club for the rest of the day, so if you will join us there, that would be great. And thank you so much for coming out.